Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 17 of Conservation Conversations with BirdLife South Africa. I'm your host this evening, Andrew de Blok, coming to you live from our offices in Johannesburg. We have over 135 episodes recorded and available on YouTube, so if you've missed out because of load shedding or your Tuesday nights have just gotten too busy, never fear, you can always catch up later on our YouTube channel. Tonight, we are privileged to be joined by quite a number of presenters, some familiar to you, some not, but all with an important message for you about OECMs. You're not sure what that stands for? Well, don't go anywhere because you're about to find out, and it is an important thing to know about in today's conservation world. For the Conservation Conversations team, we've never had 7 presenters before, so you're in for a glut of conservation information tonight. It's going to be led by Dr Giselle Murison, who some of you will know from her role at BirdLife South Africa as the Western Cape Estuaries Project Manager. She probably clocks up the most miles in a vehicle out of all the BirdLife South Africa staff, I reckon, visiting all of our estuaries, not just in the Western Cape, although her job title seems to imply that, but all the way from the Orange River through to the edge of the Eastern Cape. So, Giselle, I'm going to ask you to turn your video on and unmute yourself and kick off proceedings for us tonight. The topic for tonight's webinar, as we said earlier, is OECMs. You'll find out shortly exactly what that stands for. But as I said, these are a key tool for conservation in South Africa and more broadly outside of that. So yeah, welcome to Giselle if you're there.
Hi there, Andrew. I'm just going to start sharing my screen and invite Bronwyn Maree to speak. She's going to start us off tonight. So Bronwyn, Melissa, Sarah from Conservation Outcomes and I were part of the implementation team for the Western Cape OECM pilot project. And we're all sharing the platform tonight to share what we learned from our pilot project here in the Western Cape. And Bronwyn, I'm going to share the screen and hand over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Giselle, and good evening, everyone. It's an absolute privilege to be back on the Conservation Conversation screen with all of you, and even more to be sharing it with my powerhouse OECM project team. I can remember when we sat 2 years ago, or just over 2 years ago now, at the start of the journey of OECMs, and it seemed like we were wading through the mist or the trees trying to find our way around. But I can certainly say that we've learned a lot and we've grown a lot through the years, and hopefully we can impart some of what we've learned tonight. So again, it's extra special to share the screen with Melissa Whitecross, who needs no introduction, in this case was our technical guru. Giselle, whose attention to detail and mapping skills were essential to our team, and Sarah from Conservation Outcomes, whose out-of-the-box thinking added an extremely new and exciting dimension, as well as the many special guests you'll hear from later this evening. So let's dive right in. And so exactly, what are OECMs, or other effective area-based conservation measures? So other effective area-based conservation measures. Essentially, it's an umbrella term for measures or mechanisms which safeguard our natural areas and biodiversity outside of the traditional conservation and protected area space. OECMs came out of a concept at the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, or the CBD, and they were really only defined in 2018. So just bear with me as we work through the official definition on the screen, as this will really be important to your understanding going forward for the rest of the webinar. So the CBD defined OECMs as a geographically defined area other than a protected area, which is governed and managed in ways that achieve positive and sustained long-term outcomes for the in-situ conservation of biodiversity with associated ecosystem functions and services. So we're going to pick up a lot of these, particularly the bold sections on your screen as we work through our presentation around OECMs. Signatories to the CBD, which obviously includes South Africa, are committed to the new area-based target, which falls under the Global Biodiversity Framework, which essentially is calling for 30% of the world's natural area to be effectively conserved and managed by 2030, using protected areas or other effective area-based conservation measures, or OECMs. This is essentially the 30 by 30 target that many of you may have heard about in the media recently. So as such, South Africa's conservation estate is made up of two different elements. The first is our traditional conservation areas or spaces, our protected areas, which we will know as our national parks, our nature reserves, protected environments, and these are formally declared through legislation. The second is OECMs, again, other effective area-based conservation measures. And together these OECMs and protected areas are reported to the World Database for Protected Areas and OECMs, and essentially capture South Africa's progress against that area-based target of 30% by 2030. So the Western Cape OECM project was a 2-year project funded by the WWF Nedbank Green Trust, and it ran from July 2021 to August 2023, and it essentially piloted that definition and piloted the approach of and the assessment of identifying, assessing, and reporting OECMs. The project had 3 broad aims, and these were to firstly identify and assess potential OECMs in the Western Cape, to quantify what is the capacity and the resource needs both in the Western Cape, as well as how this could be fed into a national OECM implementation strategy or rollout plan, and to provide skills and development to support OECM assessments and reporting in the Western Cape. So just if we run very briefly into how the OECM assessment process works, this is very much a tool that is specifically for a site. So we first identify our site, and using the screening tool, which is essentially 2 simple criteria, which we will go through shortly after this process, and a desktop review, if it meets these 2 criteria, it becomes a potential OECM. If it doesn't progress through the assessment process. So once it's progressing, it requires consent from the governance authority or the landowner to fully assess and to report on this site. So there's 2 consent processes. Once the consent is given, the site is then fully assessed using an additional 6 detailed criteria, or what we call the full assessment criteria. The candidate OECM, if it meets these additional 6 and the original 2 criteria, then gets taken to or presented to an OECM review panel or committee, which is a group of experts who make sure that the assessment process has been fair and transparent, and that the criteria have indeed been met. And once it has been met and the OECM committee is happy, it is recommended for OECM status. If it is recommended, the site can then be included in our reporting on a provincial, national, and global level to that World Database on Protected Areas and OECMs. I'm now going to hand over to Giselle to continue.
Thanks so much, Bron. Thanks for that introduction. So I'm just going to quickly take us through the globally recognized criteria. So just you can see the criteria and then think about the case studies that are going to be presented this evening. You can see how they've met these criteria in full. So essentially, as Bron mentioned, the screening tool criteria are very straightforward, essentially asking only whether the site falls outside of a protected area and whether it is likely to have biodiversity value. Then you move on to the full assessment criteria, which ask for confirmation of that biodiversity value and for equitable governance and management structures to be in place to safeguard the biodiversity in the long term. And again, all of these criteria need to be met for a site to be recommended as an OECM. So OECMs can encompass a range of different approaches to governance and conservation management, which is one of the benefits, but also including the agreements signed through biodiversity stewardship. And as many of you will know, stewardship is that approach to securing land in biodiversity priority areas through entering into agreements with private and communal landowners, essentially led by conservation authorities. Biodiversity stewardship category 1 measures are our protected areas. So they're protected through the Protected Areas Act, and as you can will have heard from the definition, they're then not eligible for OECM status. We should always pursue the highest level of protection for our sites. So those sites which have that high biodiversity value, we should always get the highest level of protection, which is essentially through the Protected Areas Act. But where this is not possible, stewardship offers other excellent mechanisms, most particularly those that are now qualifying as OECMs. So the project focused on the biodiversity stewardship categories of 2 and 3 that you can see in this diagram, and assessed each of the measures against the OECM criteria. So as Bronwyn mentioned, OECMs must be assessed at the site level, but we did begin by assessing that generic best practice of each measure first. And we decided to use the traffic light system. And essentially what that means is that green measures or sites met the OECM definition, or all of the OECM criteria. Orange measures or sites meet most of the OECM definition or most of the criteria, and most of the characteristics of the remaining criteria. So essentially they're just off green, just needing some tweaks or strengthening to actually qualify as OECMs. And red measures or sites do not meet the OECM definition or assessment criteria. And again, a reminder that individual site assessments are actually required whether a measure is green, orange, or red. And the ticks here represent the case studies that were trialed through the project. And you can see, for example, that even if a measure itself in the generic sense comes out as orange, it can have sites that actually qualify and come out as green. So again, very important to assess at the site level. And what these green measures in the stewardship categories all have in common is that they're essentially secured through property and contract law, providing that long-term security and that structure for governance and management within these systems. And as you move further down into category 3, you'll see conservancies and biosphere reserve buffer zones. These, although they do not qualify as OECMs, are actually incredibly valuable in their own right in the services that they provide in terms of that collaborative platform for communication and progressing environmental management across much larger areas. And they're also fantastic focal areas for targeting OECM expansion within those zones. We also looked at a number of non-biodiversity stewardship measures. And you can see a number of these, if you look at things like military land, botanical gardens, are actually legislated through essentially non-environmental legislation. Many of our OECMs actually do not have conservation as a primary objective. Even though it is an objective of the management of the site, it is not necessarily the primary objective. We'll be seeing some of these case studies in the presentation tonight. And these examples represent those that we've seen in the Western Cape, but there will still be many to be found elsewhere in South Africa that can then be assessed and brought forward as potential OECMs going forward. So I'm actually going to hand over now to our guest presenters, and you're going to take us through some case studies. And first up is going to be Ross Kettles from Nuwejaars. Ross, welcome. Nuwejaars was the first OECM to be recommended through the Western Cape pilot project. So thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Good evening, everybody. Can everybody hear me?
All good, Russ, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for this opportunity. We're very excited about this. We've come quite a long road with BirdLife through the whole process. And right from the beginning, we felt that this is right up our alley because we aren't what you would really call a traditional conservation area. Erica might join us a little bit later. She's got challenges at home that she's dealing with. So there's a good chance I might run through this all by myself. But anyway, okay. The Nuwejaars Wetland Special Management Area is situated pretty much at the very southernmost point of our continent. It's an area of amazing natural beauty. and it's a very diverse area. This will give you an idea of where we're situated. Right at the bottom there, you can see Cape Agulhas, the southernmost point. Here's an idea. This should give you an idea why we are so important. Our conservation venture is built around the southernmost freshwater wetland system in South Africa. This region has the largest storehouse of lowland fynbos in the world. But this area is completely in private hands, and it is collectively owned by 27 landowners who farm the land, and also the historical village of Eland. This slide here shows you where we are. We're in the yellow, the light green. To the south of us is the Agulhas National Park, and then to the east is the De Mont estuary, which is also a Ramsar site. And then to the north, we have the Soetmaesberg and the Akkadisberg Mountains, which are the primary catchment for the Nuwejaars and Heuningnes River wetland system. And it's also a biodiversity corridor of immense importance. Okay, our purpose is basically to protect and manage the 4 conservation areas, the conservation areas themselves, and the interface into one functioning ecosystem, forming an innovative system for conservation on private land while providing environmental education, sustainable socio-economic activities, and tourism opportunities. Okay, just a little bit of history. We go back quite a long way, but things were formalized in 2008 when we signed our constitution. The initiative was formalized through the development of a landowners association, the constitution, and a development framework outlining the vision of the area. All the participating landowners are members of the legally constituted but voluntary landowners association. The landowners association provides for a committee of 4 executive members which rotate. We're a Section 1 not-for-profit company, and this was established to manage the area on behalf of the landowners. Our landowners also signed title deed restrictions against their properties to protect this area in perpetuity. All of this represents a 1 billion rand investment towards conservation. Okay, now we're going to quickly run through the screening tools. The first criteria is we are not a protected area. We comply as our boundaries lie outside of protected areas and protected area formal networks. The site is geographically defined. Yes, we conform because we conform to farm cadastrals with survey diagrams. The outer boundary is mapped and publicly available. A zonation map has also been developed, detailing conservation, ecological support areas, and agricultural areas.
Okay, the site is confirmed to support important biodiversity values. Yes, Nuwejaars represents about 16,500 hectares, approximately 35% of the critical biodiversity area. We're also situated in the recognized key biodiversity area, or KBA, namely the Agulhas Plain Heuningnes estuary and the Overberg Wheatbelt KBA. KBAs are the most important places in the world for species and their habitat. We also represent approximately 16,000 hectares of national freshwater ecosystem priority areas. And we host 5 threatened vegetation types, including Agulhas limestone fynbos, endangered Agulhas sand fynbos, and Overberg sandstone fynbos. And then most importantly, the critically endangered central ruin shale renosterveld and Elam ferrocrete fynbos. Here you can see just how much of those veg types we're actually currently protecting. For example, approximately 50% of all the remaining Elam ferrocrete and Agulhas sand fynbos actually lies within our boundaries. And as such, we are home to many threatened floral species, and here's just a few examples. And obviously numerous species of conservation concern. So some special species here include the endangered hangflower heath that's only found in 3 locations. The endangered Agulhas green heath, also found in 5 severely fragmented subpopulations. And then just recently, we rediscovered the mini galaxy, which is the Maree minima, which is critically endangered and was actually thought to be extinct. It was last seen in 1981. And then really special, In 2021, we discovered a brand new species to science, which was described last year, and that's the Satanthus novus anus, meaning Nuwejaars fire lily. We're also obviously home to many threatened bird species like SPKs, blue crane, Fynbos button quail. And our threatened mammals include the grey rebuck, bontebok, and leopard. And then special amphibians are critically endangered microfrog. We found a new subpopulation just recently, and then Cape Platana. Next criteria, activities which threaten the biodiversity values are prevented or mitigated. As Ross mentioned earlier, we've got a Section 21 MPO, which was established to manage the natural areas. The company employs staff, such as myself and Ross, and then we also own assets like vehicles and game, and this supports all our management operations. Significant progress has already been made with restoring and reintroducing important biodiversity values. Threats have been identified and are actively being mitigated. Some brief examples include ecological burns. We implement controlled ecological burns to prevent large runaway fires and create a mosaic of different veg ages. And this photo is just a before, and you can see some dense Port Jackson stands in the left there, and then after, sorry, here's flicking over here, and then after a nice clean burn, we also applied integrated alien and fire management to the site. Then we do a lot of restoration and rehab, and this includes a lot of alien clearing. In this photo, you'll see this is one of the wetland sites we're working on. This is before. Again, all of that green is just dense Port Jackson, and we work externally and internally. It's externally and internally funded, and we partner with government and other institutions. So this is the before, and this is what it looks like after. You'll check all the brush piles there of the biomass, and the wetlands busy in recovery, all starting to green up. Other threat mitigation includes overgrazing prevention, soil erosion prevention and restoration, and wetland rehab. In that specific wetland, we monitored the biodiversity, focusing on the avian species richness and abundance trends. Before and after conservation mitigation took place, the final results of the monitoring showed a marked increase of 66% in bird species present across the wetland, with more wetland affiliated birds observed after alien clearing took place. So that main photo there is not really great, but it was such a significant event for us because previously that small little area was just covered in thick woodland Port Jackson, and then after a few years it looked like that. So we were very, very proud of that. And then Ross, back over to you.
Okay, governance and management results in situ conservation. Okay, I think we covered here because our aim is to protect the SMA in perpetuity, to manage and maintain and improve the SMA's ecological integrity as a functioning ecosystem, to identify and research species conservation concern, to promote and manage compatible uses of the wetlands for economic benefits, and to promote a best practice, sustainable agricultural model for economic benefits, and lastly, to promote the work of the SMA to relevant stakeholders. Governance and management are likely to be sustained. We feel we qualify here too, as all members of the Landowners Association are required to place title deed restrictions on their properties related to the relevant terms of the Constitution. Contracts are signed in perpetuity. In this way, the mechanism is binding on successor in title. New property owners must remain as members of the LOA and abide by the Constitution, Development Framework, and Biodiversity Management Plan. The mechanism can only be revoked by dissolution of the LOA, which is the Landowners Association, but it requires 80% of the members to vote against it. The next one is governance and management to address equity considerations. We feel we qualify here too, as our biodiversity management plan addresses sustainable livelihoods, working with relevant stakeholders to contribute to the socio-economic development needs of all the communities living in and surrounding the Nuwejaars. The landowners retain ownership of their private assets. The landowners association constitution allows for the full involvement of members in all matters, so it's very democratic. All benefits are used to manage the area for nature and for the community in general. But very importantly, the historical town of Elim is also one of our members. Okay, so if you look at the street screening tool, I think we tick all the right boxes. And in closing, I'd like to thank all our donors and sponsors. Without them, none of this would be possible. These being WWF, the Table Mountain Fund, the Fuller Trust, the Hans Hoheisen Charitable Trust, Fynbos Trust, the Overberg District Municipality, and BirdLife South Africa. Thank you very much, everybody.
Russ, thank you so much. Erica, thank you. I think when we started this project and we started looking at OECMs, I remember us turning to each other and going, yes, Nuwejaars will actually, as an alternative measure, not captured in stewardship, but it will actually meet all the criteria of an OECM, and you do meet that definition fully. You were the first recommended OECM through the Western Cape review panel, and there's very little reason there's no doubt as to why. So thank you so much. And I'm just going to move on to our next presenter, Grant Forbes from the Overberg Rûens Conservation Trust, to talk about their excellent work in conservation easements in the Overberg. Grant, over to you.
Good morning. Good evening, everyone. Sorry. Yeah, so my name is Grant Forbes. I work with the Overberg Rûens Conservation Trust. Just making sure that everyone can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Yes,
Okay.
got it.
Thank you. So we're a very small organization trying to save one of the world's most threatened habitat types near the southernmost tip of Africa, so just a little bit north on the other side of the mountain from the Nuwejaars SMA. Yeah, and I also represent my colleague Odette Curtis-Scott, who some of you might know, the director of our trust. So for those of you that don't know what Renosterveld is, maybe by now a lot of you would know, but Renosterveld is kind of squashed between the Langeberg and the Refuge from End Mountains towards the coast, along the coastal mountains where the Overberg wheat belt basically is. And to the untrained eye, it really appears like a very drab, homogeneous shrubland. And a large part of it is quite degraded, especially in summer when you drive through and kind of the brown just hits you. And it has its own appeal and beauty. It can't compete with can't compete, but with its beautiful sister Fynbos, which is more based on the sandy soils and year-round boasts these beautiful, extravagant flowers. But then at different parts of the year, Renosterveld really comes to life. It's known as one of the richest Mediterranean ecosystems with a very high bulb diversity. And in autumn and spring, there's nothing drab or gray about it, actually. So about 300 years ago, this landscape changed dramatically. We lost several of our species in the area, game. Then further, the Bontebok, the rhino, serval were exterminated as well from the area, not lost, thankfully. And they were replaced with sheep. And also later on by the plow, removing large areas and transforming what were rolling hills of natural vegetation into a very fragmented landscape. So just to kind of zoom out, this is where we are. So just north of the southern tip of Africa, the brown area or the greenish area. This need to acknowledge that there are other Renostervelds in the Western Cape as well that's also highly at risk, although our organization focused specifically on the Overberg Rûens areas. This is just a map depicting habitat loss throughout South Africa, and that we are in that bottom red area running east to west, just showing the immense transformation. And we basically sit in an area with less than 5% of our natural vegetation remaining. Then zooming right back in again, we work across the landscape from Bot River to Heidelberg, squashed between the mountains, like I've said, the Nuwejaars and Swellendam Mountains and Napier and Bredasdorp Mountains. And then we work in 4 different types of renosterveld. And basically those dark areas is what's remaining. So different, some of them have a little bit more than others, but yeah, they're all in very bad shape right now, and it is deteriorating. So the trust was established in 2012 by Odette, and we're a very small team of about 3 to 4 people. And we work in 3 main areas, mostly education and awareness, initially trying to educate and create awareness about renosterveld within various communities, the farming community, the community groups. And just over the last 2 years, we've started actively playing a role with working with local schools. So farm schools that's around us, and then also schools in the neighboring towns. Our biggest intervention is landscape conservation, working with private landowners. Very similar situation. Most of the renosterveld is within private landowners' hands, and therefore we need to partner with them. But we also try and facilitate research where we, with landowners and other partners, identify what are the key research needs to understand our ecosystem and also its long-term resilience. So then while we come into the talk, so our flagship program is the Conservation Easement. So conservation easement in South Africa may be known as a conservation servitude. Is basically a servitude agreement that's signed over the entire property of a private property, and it speaks to the natural areas on the property. It's an agreement between the landowner and a third party, being us as the NGO, and it enables voluntary conservation to be done on the site. It's tied to with the title deed, with title deed restrictions, and also it is in perpetuity. So it outlives the landowner whenever they sell, or if they pass it generation on to the next generation. And that allows us to increase hectares of renosterveld conserved through being actively managed and restored. And then the long term of all of this is to capacitate landowners to become their own veld managers, and that the landowners are the ones that's going to leave the legacy to the ones that comes after them. So each site gets a unique sign printed for them, kind of depicting some of the biodiversity that's found on their site. Here you can see a lot of flowers, but the birds play a massive role. And some of you might know we are very involved with trying to secure sites with the very endangered black carrier. So this is just the map of our area again. We've signed to date about 21 easements with about 6,500 hectares, of which 4,500 is renosterveld, all with private landowners. And through the agreements and with the security that we can provide to our funders, we facilitate natural resource management and restoration. So through alien clearing, which isn't such a big problem in our area, it's more the management of the veld, so grazing, sometimes having to put up fences to manage grazing, implementing controlled burns in the right appropriate times, and then also watercourse restoration. So it's just a bit of background. Our first site that we took through the program or through the assessment is called Kaikudi. It's a landowner that the trust has had a very long relationship with. It's the first easement that the OECT themselves signed. The first easement was actually with WWF near Bot River. It's connected along the Soda River corridor, which drains into the De Hoop Ramsar site at De Hoop. There's large connected natural areas. It also protects central row and shell renosterveld, which is critically endangered. There's various species of conservation concern, key habitats for species in fragmented landscapes. And then, yeah, it also, all of it is basically CBAs and ecological, so key biodiversity areas, critical biodiversity areas, ecological support areas. So basically everything that's left is important. We can't choose really. It's also close proximity to the Nuwejaars Wetland nature reserve and mountain catchment areas. So if we can just take it through the screening tool quickly. So the map, a little bit small on your screen perhaps, but that blob in the middle of the landscape, that is Kaikudi. You'll see the other protected areas in blue. So just so that it's not a protected area, there's very few protected areas actually in this landscape, and Central Rûens Renosterveld there's very little actually in formal conservation. Then just to take it through the next step, the site's geographically defined. Yes, we work within the farm portions. So that also defines our boundaries, or the boundaries for the easements. The veld's all delineated, and that's in GIS and referred to in the management plan, which is attached to the servitude agreement. There is reasonable likelihood that it supports important biodiversity values. So yes, everything that remains is critical biodiversity areas. Very few ecological support areas remain, and those that are there, we try and restore them to up their level. Importantly, it conserves a large section of the Sode River, which is one of the largest rivers draining the wheat belt, or the Overberg wheat belt. So through that, there's connectivity of fragments, so it's not just these isolated pockets of vegetation. Again, Central Rûens Renosterveld, which is very poorly protected. It's less than 5% remaining, and less than 1% is in formal conservation. And again, species conservation of conservation concern. There you can see some of the other sites that we work on. So in the north is a formal nature reserve. No formal nature reserves in the agricultural landscape, but there is a network of sites that we're trying to build up around there. So institutions or mechanisms that exist to govern and manage the site. Yes, the site is within a trust, so there's a dedicated management authority. Threats are identified and addressed in the management plan, and the trust, or the trust that I work for, provides the management with technical and management support. Criterion 6, governance and management. Yes, there is a governance structure in place, and that is strengthened with the management plan that's developed with the landowner that captures the vision and management objectives. Again, threats being addressed, how will we mitigate and restore natural areas. This is touched on annually, where we review the management objectives of the sites and identify objectives going forward. And just to reiterate here, the primary objective of the site is not conservation. And that's why, I mean, OECM is such a great model. The primary objective here is agriculture, but through the easements and OECMs, we're partnering with landowners to fulfill our conservation target. In situ conservation of important values is expected to be for the long term. Yes, as long term as things can be in South Africa, but there is a long-term relationship with the landowner pre the easement signing and even pre the OECM assessments. There's a regular contact between us as the third party and the landowner, and the servitude agreement is attached to the title deed, so it outlives the landowner. And is there equity considerations? Yes, it's a private farm, and it is equitable governance addressed within the governing structure of the trust in which the property sits. So overall, Kaikudi meets all the criteria. It's great because it was the first easement to go through the process. It got recommended OECM status by the Western Cape OECM Review Committee earlier this year. And yeah, we just also feel this is a massive achievement, where these sites formerly would not have been acknowledged in the conservation estate of the country. But through this, we're giving landowners the opportunity to really contribute to conservation of critical biodiversity areas. Thanks, Giselle.
Thanks so much, Grant. An excellent presentation. And I just want to say again, from what you commented on there the last comment there which was that these measures are not recognized in South Africa's conservation estate currently. And the OECM process gives the landowners and yourselves the chance to be recognized globally for your conservation efforts, which I think is an incredible thing considering the excellent work that you do. Thank you so much, Grant.
Thanks.
I'm
Giselle.
going to, no problem. I'm going to ask for Sarah, who's going to be presenting on National Botanical Gardens this evening on behalf of Zambi. Sarah, would you like to step in?
Hi, good evening, Giselle, and good evening, everyone. So wonderful to be part of this today. Give me just a little moment while I do share my screen and bring on all the bells and whistles. Can you see my screen and can you hear me?
Yeah, all good, Sarah.
Perfect, thank you so much. So good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be part of this. And it's a really great work that BirdLife is able to do, and to be able to hold these type of events. It just shares so much fantastic and really necessary information to a broader audience. And so thank you to all of you for being here tonight and listening. So it was such a privilege to delve into so many of these different categories and find out more of what is outside of that traditional conservation estate and what can be recognized as OECMs. And as you've seen from what the work the OECT does, as well as the Nuwejaars, and as well as many other case studies that we've looked at, one of the measures we also had the privilege of looking at was the National Botanical Gardens. And many of you might think, what is the definition of a botanical garden? We might think transformed gardens. We might think that, is this a true representation of your natural intact felt? And something that was such a wonderful realization for myself was many of these national botanical gardens are actually defined as a conservation garden. And when we look at our 3 gardens that are specifically found in the Western Cape, and we're so lucky to have 3 in the Western Cape, they're usually found in there's a garden for each biome. And when you look at the Karoo Desert National Botanical Gardens, the Kirstenbosch National Botanical Gardens, as well as the Harold Porter National Botanical Gardens, all of these have about a ratio of about 20% of the area is a transformed garden, still indigenous to the area. And then there's a beautiful expanse of intact local vegetation representing that local area that forms part of that larger garden and is protected. But as I was saying, we are so lucky in South Africa to have these national botanical gardens open to the public, that we can go and learn about the different biomes that we have in this country. And this is just a map showing some of these locations. And the idea is that a garden would be placed, generally 1 in each province, but then where there is a selection of different biomes, there will be a garden that's able to represent those different biomes. And there's nothing like the support and the partners that really get behind making these gardens all possible. So there are huge partnerships that take place behind the scenes and are involved with making these gardens a reality. And as I was saying, so the 3 gardens we really sort of delved into were the Karoo Desert, Kirstenbosch, and Harold Porter. And specifically for this talk today, I'm going to be focusing on that Karoo Desert National Botanical Garden. And as I go through the slides, you are going to be tantalized with some beautiful pictures just of those gardens, specifically at this time of year, coming into spring. The gardens and the facies have been looking incredible. So I really want you to have a good look at the pictures I have included in these slides. So what I was saying earlier, and just to take a step back of what we're talking about with these national botanical gardens, and what I was saying earlier in that these gardens have been defined as conservation gardens. So that doesn't mean that we're just talking to a small transformed area that is your garden itself. These national botanical gardens are representing a beautiful segment of that particular biome. And as I was saying, it's generally about a 20% of that garden has been transformed. And then we've got a wonderful representation of that biome that's specifically under that SANBI management and that National Botanical Gardens management to help and conserve and represent that particular vegetation type. And then as so many of us know and have the privilege to experience, these gardens play such an important role in education, engaging communities around them, and then of course that tourism and giving an insight for those our international visitors. It's such a privilege just to spend time in these gardens. So now a bit of the nitty-gritties, and I want you to, as I go through this, try and remember those 8 criteria of what an OECM is. And we've had examples of the RCT and the easements, as well as Nuwejaars. National Botanical Gardens are another example of an OECM where they're not actually recognized as protected areas, but interestingly enough, National Botanical Gardens fall under an act. So the National Environmental Management of Biodiversity Act. And they have a very specific section within this act for National Botanical Gardens. And it's section 33 that gives the minister the ability to literally declare a National Botanical Garden. And interesting enough, this follows almost the same process as you would a declaration of a protected area. And so interesting that through OECMs, this is now giving that way for National Botanical Gardens to be recognized as equal to a protected area, even though we're seeing that their legislation is very tight, in that you'd even need to go through public participation to remove a National Botanical Garden. And then within, so SANBI has the mandate to be the management authority of these particular sites. And there's a very clear structure that we see coming through and what's stipulated through the NEMBA Act. And there's an appointed chief director for the National Botanical Gardens. And at the moment, this is Christopher Willis, who's sitting with us today, and wonderful that you could join. And then as well, each site, each of these gardens has an on-site curator, and they are responsible for carrying out the management activities on that site, tailoring it to the needs of what that site is specifically needing. And specifically for this site, so the Karoo Desert National Botanical Garden, the creator is Ricardo Riddles, who does a fantastic job in managing that site and addressing the threats that might come up with that particular, in that particular area. And then, as we know, these gardens play a fundamental role in contributing to some of South Africa's targets. There's a wonderful framework that is set out through the NEMBA Act, through South African policy, that ensures that SANBI, there's a quarterly reporting basis, reporting that takes place on an annual basis. And this ensures that alignment with strategic plans. These gardens are also contributing to other national as well as global targets. And then as well as they feeding quite tightly into that national development plan for 2030. And there's a whole expansion strategy for the gardens. They're constantly thinking how to better manage. And with this, there are a series of plans that try and take into the whole spectrum of how to better manage the site. So looking at the living collections policy and plan, coordinating what is the specific needs for the different vegetation types and the threats that are faced in each garden. And then also trying to take into consideration the different risk management. So also, what are the health and safety implications? What is the business continuity plan? And then as well as SANBI's corporate disaster management plan. So fitting into the bigger organization that is SANBI, there's much of this overarching planning that can take place and ensure the long-term sustainability of the site and ensure that there's thinking of what are the possible risks and how can that be mitigated, and how can the area be managed to the best of its ability. So a little about the Karoo Desert National Botanical Garden. So what an absolute stunning site with the Hex River mountain range stretching out behind them. Sometimes at the right time of year, those mountains will get a nice dose of snow at the top, and you can imagine what a beautiful photographic opportunity that really is. But this is a national botanical garden that's representing an arid and a semi-arid biome. So it's situated in the succulent Karoo biome. And about 154 hectares of the garden is cultivated, but the whole garden makes up about 952 hectares. So it's a real beautiful expanse of this area. This is a little bit of a bird's-eye view of the five cadasters that make up the area. So 3 of them are farm portions, and then 2 of them are ashy earths. And if you do find yourself in this area, which is just outside of Worcester, there are 2 beautiful trails you can actually do within these botanical gardens. And one's called the Shale, it's the Shale Trail, and then one is the Geespokkie Trail. So something when you are on your road trip down to the Cape, definitely pop into this garden and have a look. But this is maybe an example of how we might start doing a bit of a screen assessment of a site and a bit of a desktop assessment. And as Bron was saying earlier, it is so essential that this is a site-by-site basis. As we go through the criteria, you'll realize that not all, let's say, national botanical gardens, not all of them will be OECMs. And I'll speak to that a little bit when we look at the criteria. So this particular site, so it's sitting with a fantastic CBA portion running through it. And as many of us in the environmental sector know, abbreviations are the worst, yet we love them in this sector. But CBAs stand for critical biodiversity areas. And this is what really helps us to get a bit of understanding, what has it been mapped for that, that is important in that particular area. And what we can see is that it's a climate adaptation, a corridor. It's got South African significant vegetation types. It's got a number of threatened species that come through it. And it's also very important for water resource protection areas. And it's not only the critical biodiversity areas that are important, it also has a good amount of your ecological support areas, your what we abbreviate to an ESA. So a really nice balance coming through that of really good intact vegetation types. And then it's made up of 2 vegetation types. So we've got the Breede Shale Renosterveld, which this is your bluer, sort of what's on your map in front. And it's been, the conservation status is vulnerable, and it's also got the protection status of being poorly protected. So it's not found, it isn't found in many of the protected areas, and it hasn't got a good protection record. So the more areas we can get of this vegetation type under protection, the better, and the closer we can get to those conservation targets. The other vegetation type is the Robertson Karoo, and it's least threatened, but again, we're seeing it as it's hardly protected. So again, as much of this vegetation type we can gain under protected areas or OECMs, the closer we can get to the conservation target. And then in summary, when we look at the criteria, we've got what we know from this particular national botanical garden is that it does not lie in a protected area. And I'll show a map in a little bit. It almost joins the Hex River mountain catchment areas, but it's not counted. It has no protected areas that fall across it. Then what you'll see between our criteria 2 and our criteria 4 is these both speak to, is the site likely to support important biodiversity values? And number 4, the site is then confirmed to support important biodiversity values. And this is taking into consideration, are there species that are rare, endangered, vulnerable? Is it taking into consideration the connectivity? Is it linking onto other natural areas? Is there critical biodiversity areas, and is the veld in a good condition? And so there's about 5 different aspects that this particular, the biodiversity values takes into consideration. And as you might have seen from the maps, it's fantastic to see that this Karoo Desert Botanical Garden, it sits really nicely in an intact landscape. It's connecting really well into that adaptation climate corridor. There's beautiful altitudinal range coming through with that property, and a real fantastic range of rare and endangered species coming through, especially in that succulent Karoo biome, and the pressures that that particular biome is facing as well. Then the third criteria, so is the site geographically defined? What we've seen from those maps is that we're using the cadasters. So it's beautifully surveyed. There's a Surveyor General diagram that represents that cadaster or an earth, and those can go ahead as being the outline of the OECM. Then criteria 5, so the activities which threaten the important biodiversity values of the site are prevented or mitigated. So this speaks again, is there a clear management authority in place? And as through the legislation and the NEMBA Act, they delegate and mandate that management authority position to SANBI. And as you saw earlier, SANBI has a very clear staff or who are responsible for that management on the ground, and very clear in terms of when threats do appear. So let's say there might be alien vegetation that pops up or erosion that's needing addressed. There's an on-hand curator who's able to address those, as well as a management plan that's able to be adaptive and be a live plan. Number 6, so the governance and management of the site results in the Institute Conservation of Important Biodiversity Values. This is where there's a number of those plans come into place. So through SANBI, they have the Living Collections Policy Plan. And then the site, as I was saying earlier, it's very much so managed to what are those specific needs for that particular biome and that particular vegetation type. And with the dedicated management plan, so the waste, the fire, the alien invasive species management plans, and then as well as the maintenance plan for the cultivated areas. And then for number 7, so when we look at criteria 7, the governance and management arrangements are likely to be sustained. This has often been one of the stumbling blocks for many of the measures that we have looked at for OECMs. And what is so beautiful about the National Botanical Gardens is that it is clearly laid out in the NEMBA Act under Section 33 how to declare a National Botanical Garden. It's endorsed on the title deeds. There's a Gazette notice that goes out with that sort of declaration for that National Botanical Garden. And it's just wonderful that now it can be brought in, although it can be seen as being as strong as a protected area, it's never been recognized as a protected area. So now under the OECM banner, it can now come under and be recognized for that contribution to conservation that they're making. And then the number 8, the governance and management arrangements address equity considerations. And so with SANBI being a national entity, there's a very set structure that they have to follow. They're needing to address equity considerations. There's a whole checks and balance that that keeps them in line with making sure that they are hitting the particular targets. And the one example, so the National Botanical Gardens, they contribute to the national development plan for 2030. And this looks to aid in helping to eliminate poverty and reduce inequality. They achieve this by making the direct link between biodiversity, capacity building, and development. So we know in terms of their education programs they run in the gardens, their social upliftment programs, there's a lot that are upskilling, capacity building, a lot of programs that the garden is running, which is really fantastic to see. And so then SANBI and its National Botanical Gardens comply with all the governmental policies and regulations, including the Employment Equity Act. And then SANBI has targets for employment equity. So that's, from going through this quite briefly, it really came through quite positively with the Karoo Desert National Botanical Garden, giving us the green light for all of the necessary criteria. Something, and I know Melissa will speak to this a bit later, but something that's been very interesting about OECMs, and I think really useful to sort of a checks and balance for our protected areas register. So some of you might know a way of that South Africa is able to account for all the different protected areas that exist within South Africa. We have the protected areas register, and this is portrayed on your image on your left-hand side. And we have two sections. We have the areas that are protected areas, and those range from the World Heritage Sites, national parks, nature reserves, and all the way down. And then you also have your conservation areas. So your conservation areas are sites that are not yet recognized as protected areas. And this is what you'll see botanical gardens fall under. So now OECMs will be recognizing some of those conservation areas as equal as OECMs and equal to protected areas. But what is interesting and what you are seeing on these two maps is that there's a difference. What we are seeing on our protected areas register is far bigger than what the Karoo National Botanical Gardens actually are, and that it's a far smaller area and doesn't reach all the way up to the Hex Mountains. So it's a little bit of being able to catch these mistakes. And this is, again, an advantage of the OECM process of where are the strengths and weaknesses, where are there mapping inaccuracies that can be caught. And it's a bit of a checks and balance for these sites that are being reported on. And while I'm just touching on National Botanical Gardens, and I mentioned earlier that not all National Botanical Gardens would be able to be reported on as OECMs. And this isn't because they don't have exceptional management plans or they don't have exceptional curators. This might be an issue where we saw in the Kirstenbosch National Botanical Gardens. And what you can see on the protected areas register is that there's an array of different protected areas that are covering this particular site. So we know the Kirstenbosch Gardens are nestled right next to Table Mountain. And you can see the stripy layers here. That's recognized as a World Heritage Site. And it's also recognized with that little gray cover as a nature reserve. And what you've heard from going through the different criteria for OECMs is that if they are already recognized as a protected area, which a World Heritage Site and a nature reserve are, it can't go ahead as being an OECM, as it's already being accounted for on that protected area register. So I hope that helps, and definitely a strength of OECMs and how it can catch those differences and those inaccuracies. But thank you so much. Really great to speak to you all, and it's been a wonderful learning experience.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Yes, it's been fascinating to see how our non-environmental legislation or other legislation within South Africa has actually provided this opportunity to showcase some really excellent conservation work, like NEMBA, like even our military acts and the military land that can be used for conservation, and looking at things like our cultural and heritage sites as well. I'm just going to share the screen, and we're going to start wrapping up now. And I just want to point out that all of these measures that we talked about tonight, the case studies that presented, they all offer contributions to South Africa's 30 by 30 targets. And that will be a fantastic thing for South Africa to use OECMs and use OECMs of this caliber to actually achieve that 30 by 30 target that they're party to as part of this CBD. And I'm actually going to hand over to Melissa now to wrap up this evening's webinar. Melissa.
Hello, everyone. It's so special to be back with the Conservation Conversations family tonight. What an incredible overview of the OECM project and its results. A big thanks to all of you for sticking it out to the end. I promise we are almost there. The recommended OECMs presented tonight also showcase the incredible benefits of OECMs. OECMs recognize existing efforts towards effective biodiversity conservation on the global stage and will help South Africa reach their conservation targets by 2030. OECMs also build resilient, integrated, and connected landscapes, which help address issues such as climate change and biodiversity loss. OECMs allow for a range of stakeholders, as we've seen tonight, to be involved and empowered through the recognition of OECMs, including local communities, private landowners, government officials, and conservation organizations. OECMs provide tools to identify the strengths and weaknesses of conservation management of sites, and OECMs facilitate a more inclusive area-based conservation network by identifying and recognizing alternative mechanisms to area-based conservation that are not currently being recognized through biodiversity stewardship, and by allowing the inclusion of previously excluded or marginalized groups of land use types. OECMs are about recognizing the good work that is already being done for nature outside of our traditional conservation space. Now, this pilot project has produced some very important outputs and products, which will aid in continuing to inform, educate the community of practice, and roll out OECMs across South Africa and the rest of the world. These include a short project synthesis report for those of us who don't like to read, a detailed technical review with over 100 pages of in-depth OECM knowledge from the project, a consolidated costings and resourcing report to capture the financial implications of OECM rollout in South Africa for our accountants out there, as well as an easy-to-use set of OECM templates, which will make the assessment process so much easier as you take your OECMs through to review. If you're interested in accessing any of this information and OECM documentation or training materials, please visit BirdLife South Africa's website or the IUCN OECM Working Group site, and you can see the links on screen there, and I'm sure they'll be posted up on the YouTube channel as well. So finally, this project has been another critical step in South Africa's OECM journey and has been closely supported by the broader IUCN International OECM team to enable lessons learned to be translated beyond our borders as the world works towards the 30 by 30 target. I was privileged to represent BirdLife South Africa at the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment's 30 by 30 implementation planning workshop in June this year, where the commitment to pursue the rollout of OECMs was made by all stakeholders present. This meeting has paved the way to reignite the National OECM Task Team housed with SANBI under the National Stewardship Technical Working Group, who are now working towards the hosting of a national OECM bootcamp taking place in November this year, which will enable us to further the implementation and rollout of our OECMs nationally. Coming out of this pilot project, we will need to see further effort towards strengthening those identified orange and red mechanisms, particularly those in the wildlife ranching sector and the sustainable agriculture certification schemes, where many more potential OECM hectares lie in wait. The OECM framework really does provide South Africa with a strong set of guidelines to strengthen our conservation offerings outside of our traditional protected areas, and are going to be a very important step for pushing South Africa closer to their commitments under the 30 by 30 target. It's been a huge privilege to be part of this team, and a massive thank you from me to Giselle, Bronwyn, Sarah, and Kevin, who I see is in the audience tonight from Conservation Outcomes. It has been an incredible partnership between our two organizations, and in completing this project, I'm really, really proud of what we've been able to put out there and further the OECM journey. I wish South Africa all of the best as we continue to take these OECMs forward. And I'm going to hand back to Giselle to close us out for tonight's show and just thank all of the relevant partners. Thank you.
Melissa, thank you so much for taking us through that and the next steps around OECMs. I'm not going to add too much more because I can see it's very late. I'm going to hand back to Andrew, but I just want to thank all the participants in tonight's webinar, all our presenters. Thank you so much. You are doing such brilliant work out there in the landscape and all are deserving of qualifying and being recommended as OECM going forward. And a huge thank you to our team. Fantastic to come together this evening. And again, a big thank you to our funder, WWF Netbank Green Trust, for this project. Fantastic to be part of this work. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you so much from myself and from the audience. It was an incredibly informative talk. I'm going to invite all of our speakers to show their faces once more, turn on their videos just so we can thank them. There's a few reactions coming through on the Zoom reactions bar. Thank you to those of you sending those through. I think we can all probably be OECM assessors now. We all know the screening tool off by heart. So we're going to have OECM springing up all over South Africa. But on a more serious note, I mean, this is the cold face of conservation and how we're going to meet our targets, 30 by 30 just being one of them. But having all these innovative ways to use land, to use areas for conservation purposes and keep them there in perpetuity as well is just that is so necessary in today's South African conservation landscape, but also more broadly across the world. And I know you guys are all pioneers of this. It was so lovely to have the likes of ORCT, the likes of Nuwejaars, Sarah, your talk as well, just showcasing these wonderful projects that are going on across the Western Cape and across South Africa. So thank you to each one of the speakers. Thank you to Giselle for putting this super panel together and for chairing it and making sure everything weaves together so beautifully. There is an opportunity for us to ask a couple of questions. We usually cut off at 8:30, so we have just a couple of minutes really. So the first one, I'm not sure quite who to point this at, maybe Giselle, you can give it a stab, but from Fusi, how many percentage points have OECMs contributed so far towards that CBD target? Do you have a number on it and maybe what we're aiming for in future for OECMs to contribute?
Oh, that's no, it's a great question. Unfortunately, it's probably just a little bit too soon in the process for us to be able to give you a number. You might have seen very briefly from the map and table that I showed in the presentation that from the measures that we've assessed through the OECM and that have come up green already, there's already around 160,000 hectares in the pool that will contribute to South Africa's global OECM estate going forward. But we do have targets around OECM's protected areas, the ratio that will contribute to the 30 by 30 target going forward. Melissa, I think you probably know that better than I, if you want to step in.
Good, thanks, Giselle. Yeah, so this came up at the 30 by 30 implementation workshop I mentioned, and we weren't able to plot out our OECM hectares, but we do have a pretty good handle on our protected area hectares. So it looks like OECMs are going to have to make up about 10% of South Africa's 30 by 30 target. So we have our work cut out for us, and we're going to have to search far and wide to fill that 10%. But I have no doubt that the people on the screen and those not with us at the moment are going to do their very best to meet that target.
Fantastic. Thank you. That is quite an ambitious target, but as you say, I think we've got the A team in place to get it done. Melissa, I'm just going to keep you on while you're there. Firstly, welcome back. I didn't think we'd have you back on so soon, but it is great to have you back, the mother of conservation conversations. There was a question from Warren, which I know you typed an answer to, but I thought it might be of more general interest about, well, I'll read it out. And Warren asked, should industry wish to participate in the development, securing or funding of OECMs, would they be able to derive offset credits as is possible in the establishment of and trade of biodiversity offset receiving areas? You had a very interesting answer, if you don't mind repeating for everyone.
Sure thing. Thanks, Andrew. And thanks, Warren, for the excellent question. As I said in my typed response, short answer, yes, absolutely. We've seen how corporate has come to South Africa's biodiversity stewardship aid and is helping roll out a lot of good protected area expansion work. I don't see why OECM expansion shouldn't be any different. There's obviously a lot of color and flavor to the OECM mechanism, so it'll have to be on a case-by-case basis and a site-by-site basis. But without a doubt, I think there is going to be a lot of good parallels for corporates to get involved and finance it and watch this space. We're rapidly looking at ways to align interesting carbon offset projects with the potential OECM framework. But I'm not going to say any more because I've got some work to do. Thanks, Andrew.
Excellent. All right. So I think that covers it from the official questions from the Q&A. Just a last thank you from me and a thank you from the audience for everyone putting in the time and the effort to deliver your excellent presentations. You're all doing fantastic work. Keep it up. We're wishing you all the best. And we'll hopefully have each of you on at some point in the future to report even more successes along your various projects that you're working on. So thanks for joining us on Conservation Conversations. It's been a wonderful evening. I hope everyone's enjoyed it. Do come and join us again in 2 weeks' time. Until then, yeah, keep safe, keep warm. For those of you who are in the Cape, I hear it's very cold. Up in Johannesburg, it's wonderfully warm and springtime is here. But enjoy yourselves, go watch some birds, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, team. Cheers, everyone.
Everyone.
Thank you. Cheerio.